At 32,000 feet, Flight 782 drifted across the upper edge of the continent like a silver arrow slicing through a watercolor sky. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting streaks of copper, peach, and deep violet across the clouds. The cabin lights hummed softly, glowing a gentle gold that made everything look peaceful, too peaceful, considering what was about to unfold. Captain Reed Mason sat in the left seat of the cockpit, sleeves rolled up, focus sharp, jaw tight with the discipline of a man who had spent half his life in the air. He was a former Air Force instructor, a pilot who had navigated storms that swallowed lesser men whole. His calm was legendary. His flight hours were a badge of honor. And tonight he had felt good, confident enough to tell his co-pilot Evan Price that he'd take the landing because the sky felt lucky. But 20 minutes after saying it, Reed's luck snapped like a wire. It started small, a flicker in his left eye, a twinge behind his ribs, a heaviness in his breath he tried to shake off by adjusting his posture. Evan noticed. "You good, Captain?" Reed opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. His lips parted, his throat tensed, yet the air refused to move. His hand shot instinctively toward the center console, trying to steady himself. Evan leaned forward. "Sir." Reed's fingers curled, then spasmed. His breath hitched in short, rattled bursts. His knees buckled beneath the harness. His head drooped forward slowly, like someone falling asleep at the wheel, until his forehead smacked the control panel with a dull thud. Alarm shrieked. The autopilot tried to compensate for a sudden altitude dip, but the aircraft tilted ever so slightly, just enough to make the cockpit feel like it had shifted by inches. "Captain," Evan shouted, grabbing Reed's shoulder. Reed didn't move. The man who had once barked orders over roaring jet engines was now limp, deadweight against the unforgiving metal of the control board. Evan's pulse detonated in his ears. "No, no, no, stay with me, Reed." He fumbled with the oxygen mask, tried pressing it to the captain's face, but Reed's jaw hung slack. His chest barely rose. Evan's breathing turned sharp, erratic. He fumbled for the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 782. Captain is unresponsive. I repeat, the captain has collapsed. Request immediate medical guidance." His voice cracked like breaking glass. "ATC, please respond." Static. Not silence, static. An ocean of white noise that felt like being buried under snow. Evan banged the radio panel. "ATC, do you copy? Denver Center, this is Flight 782 declaring an emergency." Still nothing. He looked back at Reed, his mentor, his guide, the man who had taught him how to land gracefully in crosswinds and how to stay calm during failures. Reed had told him once, "You stay in control until the plane stops moving, not 1 second less." Evan felt completely, utterly out of control. A banging sound jolted him. The cockpit door. Someone was pounding on it. He twisted in his seat. "Stay out, FAA regs." But the pounding intensified. 3 hard, urgent knocks. No hesitation. Then the small security viewport slid open, and a pair of eyes stared in, focused, determined, and blazing with the kind of intensity found only in people who'd fought their way through hell and lived to tell about it. A muffled female voice, "Let me in now." Evan froze. She looked familiar, though he couldn't place why. Her tone wasn't frantic, it was commanding. She wasn't afraid of the situation. She looked like she expected it. He stood, cracked the door slightly. And she pushed it open, with enough force to make him stumble back. She stepped inside wearing a worn brown aviator jacket with patches faded by sun and sand. Her hair was braided tight. Her posture was straight, military straight. That much Evan recognized immediately. "What are you doing?" he demanded, voice shaking. "Passengers aren't allowed." She shot him a glare that sliced him to his bones. "Move." It wasn't a request. It was the same voice that had probably once cut through roaring jet engines to command formation pilots. She dropped to her knees beside Captain Mason and touched his neck, pressing fingers expertly against his carotid artery. Her jaw locked, her eyes narrowed. "He's alive," she said softly, but barely. Evan couldn't breathe. "Do you have medical training?" "Yes," she looked him dead in the eye, "and flight training." That stopped him cold. She rose and eased into the captain's seat, with a familiarity that sent a chill up Evan's spine. "Who are you?" he whispered. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she scanned the control panel, adjusted thrust, and flicked 3 switches Evan hadn't even realized she saw. Her movements were fast, faster than any civilian passenger should ever be capable of. "The aircraft will hold," she murmured, "but only for a few minutes unless someone actually flies this thing." Evan swallowed hard, his heart hammered like a fist trying to escape his chest. "Tell me who you are." The woman kept her hands on the yoke, eyes focused forward, voice lowering to something tight and dry. "My name won't help you right now. Try me." She hesitated for the first time, a hesitation that carried weight, like the name itself was a loaded weapon. Finally she exhaled. "Call sign Widow 6. The cockpit fell silent. Evan felt the air leave his lungs as though he'd been punched. He stared at her, stunned. No, that's not Widow 6's. She's dead," she said quietly. Evan nodded, dazed. "The Air Force said you died 3 years ago, on that mission over." "Not now." She tightened her grip on the controls. "We have bigger problems." Evan's eyes widened as he looked at the radar screen. 2 blips fast approaching from the west, high speed, high altitude. Military signatures. The blood drained from his face. "Are those?" "Yes," she said. "F-22 Raptors." Evan's throat turned to dust. Why would fighters be? She cut him off. "Because they've already identified me." She didn't look at him when she said it. She didn't have to. Her voice carried everything: history, danger, betrayal. And a truth Evan wasn't ready for. "They're coming," she said softly, "to make sure I never touch ground again." Evan's breath stopped. She adjusted the plane slightly, steadying the altitude. Then she whispered a final line that made his stomach turn to ice. "And they will intercept us in less than 3 minutes. Widow 6 steps forward." The cockpit felt suddenly smaller, as if the air itself had thickened. Lightning-fast F-22s racing toward a commercial jet wasn't just alarming, it was unheard of. Evan's pulse thundered in his ears. He stared at the woman, Widow 6, a ghost, a myth, a name whispered in Air Force circles with equal parts awe and dread, a pilot whose record-breaking reflexes were matched only by the mystery surrounding her disappearance. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered again, because saying it out loud didn't make it any more real. She kept her eyes on the horizon, jaw flexing. A lot of things were supposed to happen. Her voice wasn't cold, it was controlled. The voice of someone who had spent years giving orders from cockpits far more hostile than this one. She adjusted the throttle, her movements sharp, decisive, the kind of instinctive flow that only came from thousands of hours in military-grade fighters. Not commercial aircraft, not airliners with 162 souls on board. Evan finally forced himself into the right seat. His hands trembled as he reached for the intercom. I need to inform the cabin about the captain." "Not yet," she snapped. He looked at her, stunned. "They deserve to know. And if you spark panic before those Raptors make visual contact, we'll have 160 terrified passengers storming the aisles and making this aircraft impossible to control." She shifted a dial. "We need calm, control, silence." Her reasoning was brutal, but right. Evan swallowed his frustration. Okay, but the ATC blackout, why aren't we getting anyone?" She didn't look at him, "Because someone jammed the channel." Evan blinked. "Jammed? You're saying someone is Targeting this flight, she finished bluntly. Yes. The words punched through his chest. Before he could speak again, a soft thunk sound echoed through the cockpit as one of the external cameras activated. The video feed flickered onto a small screen on the right side of the panel. A sleek predatory shadow slid into view. An F-22. The fighter flew so close Evan could see the pilot's helmet glinting under the last strip of sun. The Raptor hovered like a hawk watching a wounded rabbit, steady, deliberate, patient. Jesus, Evan whispered, they're really here. The woman, Widow 6, didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. I told you. Her hands, though still steady, tightened around the yoke. There was tension there, buried deep, hidden under layers of discipline. Evan felt it, a tremor in the air, a crackle of old wounds reopening. He forced himself to breathe. Look, if these fighters are here to eliminate you, what are we supposed to do? We're in a commercial jet. They're here because of me, she corrected. But right now, I'm the only one who can keep this plane stable. So unless you want every life on board to hinge on luck, she gestured toward the unconscious captain, I suggest you work with me, not against me. Evan looked back at Captain Mason. Reed's breathing was shallow, his pulse weak. Evan felt a hollow ache twist inside him, fear, guilt, helplessness. He turned back to her. How did you know something was wrong with ATC so fast? She gave a faint, humorless laugh. When you've been hunted once, you learn the signs. The words hung heavy in the air. Before Evan could respond, a sudden beep cut through the cockpit. A text transmission flashed onto their military emergency line, one that civilian jets weren't supposed to receive. Unknown aircraft, identify crew. Evan stiffened. They're contacting us directly. Widow 6 leaned forward, flipping switches with fluid precision. They're scanning the cockpit through our windows. They know someone extra is in here. The next message arrived seconds later. Unidentified third-person DETACTED in cockpit. State identity immediately. Evan's throat constricted. How do they even know? Helmet cameras, she said. Zoom lenses, infrared, don't underestimate them, Evan. He didn't remember giving her his name. She didn't seem to care. She tapped the comm switch. They want my identity, her voice dropped, almost dangerous. Fine. Evan grabbed her arm. No, if they know it's you. They already know, she cut him off. Her eyes, sharp and unblinking, locked on the Raptor outside as she pressed the transmit button. This is Widow 6, she said slowly, requesting medical priority corridor to Denver. The response was immediate. Static crackled, then a voice Evan had never heard, trembling with disbelief. Confirm identity, Widow 6. That's impossible. Silence stretched out like wire ready to snap. Even the engines sounded quieter. The woman exhaled sharply through her nose. Not so impossible after all. The F-22 pilot's voice returned, this time colder, more rigid. Widow 6, you are not authorized to be airborne. Command is ordering Flight 782 to divert immediately to Cheyenne Air Force Base. That meant only one thing. Interception, arrest, or worse. Evan felt the bottom drop out from under him. We can't land there. We don't have medical personnel prepared for the captain, and that runway isn't long enough for a safe emergency approach. Widow 6 nodded. They know. Then why? Because they don't care, she said. Their priority isn't saving him, it's containing me. Her eyes flicked toward the unconscious captain. If they force us down, she murmured, he won't make it. Evan felt heat rush to his face. Anger. Helplessness. Then what do we do? If they think you're dangerous, they'll shoot us down before they let you land anywhere near a civilian city. Her gaze turned toward him, steady, unshaken. They won't shoot us down, she said. Not with me on board. How can you be so sure? He demanded. A shadow crossed her expression, something sharp, haunted and buried deep. Because the last time they thought I was dead, she whispered, 2 raptors didn't make it home. She didn't blink. Evan didn't breathe. Before he could ask what she meant, the cockpit vibrated with a low rumble. A second F-22 slid into view on the opposite side, wings angled, position aggressive. Widow 6 muttered under her breath, "Of course, the full escort." A third buzz echoed through the comm system, a new directive appearing. "All aircraft crew, prepare 4 redirection procedures." Evan's stomach twisted. "They're hurting us, aren't they?" "Yes," she said. The plane's altitude rebalanced automatically as the F-22s adjusted formation around them like shepherd dogs circling a reluctant animal. Widow 6 leaned forward, tone clipped. "I need you to do exactly what I say." Evan swallowed hard. "What is that?" "Get ready," she said, eyes narrowing as she tightened grip on the controls. He hesitated. "For what?" She didn't answer at first. Her chest rose with a long, steady breath, the kind a fighter pilot takes before entering combat. Then she said, "For the moment, they realize I'm not going where they want." Evan's heart stopped. "You're planning to disobey them." Her response was a whisper. "I'm planning to survive." She gripped the yoke harder. "If those fighters force this plane down," she added, "you, me, Reed, and every soul back there will never see the ground alive." Outside, one of the raptors banked hard, signaling a command gesture. Widow 6 didn't follow. Instead, she switched off the autopilot. The aircraft dipped sharply. Evan's scream caught in his throat. Passengers in the cabin cried out in terror. And Widow 6 whispered, "They wanted me back in their hands. They should have killed me the first time." The cabin of the commercial jet was now a storm of chaos. Flight attendants were shouting into their headsets, hands trembling as they tried to calm passengers whose eyes darted between the slumped pilot and the rapidly flashing warning lights. The autopilot groaned against the strain of maintaining altitude, compensating for the erratic inputs from a pilot who was no longer conscious. Sweat rolled down Commander Briggs' forehead as he pressed his palm against the cockpit window, hoping for some miracle, but there was none. "Ma'am, you have to get in there," Briggs said, his voice low but urgent, his tone a mix of command and desperation. He didn't look at her yet. He needed to see if she was ready to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding. She hesitated, her hands shaking against the door frame, feeling the weight of every life on board pressing down on her shoulders. Her mind raced. She had flown military missions, yes, but nothing like this. A commercial airliner, packed with civilians at 32,000 feet, and a pilot who might not regain consciousness. She could almost hear the unspoken question in the cabin. Would anyone survive if she failed? "Call sign," she heard Briggs mutter into his radio almost reflexively. The phrase rippled through the frequencies, unintentional but fateful. 01, she said without thinking, the words leaving her lips with an instinctual confidence she didn't know she possessed. The call sign was hers, assigned decades ago during her time as a fighter pilot, her legacy, her reputation. And even though she had walked away from that life years ago, it still held power. On the radar, hundreds of miles away, 2 F-22s had been scrambling to intercept what they assumed was a rogue aircraft. Their pilots had been expecting a threat, an unidentified plane maneuvering in restricted airspace. Then, just as the call sign echoed across their comms, their world froze. The term 01 wasn't just another call sign, it was legendary. Even the most hardened F-22 pilots, trained to act without hesitation, felt the hair rise on their arms. Something about that name demanded attention. In the cockpit, she finally pushed the door open and stepped inside. The pilot's head lolled to the side, unconscious, his face pale and drawn. She felt her stomach twist, so much training, so many lives in her hands, and yet the human element never left you unscathed. Her gloved hands moved almost automatically, checking vitals, stabilizing the oxygen mask, adjusting the throttles. Every second counted, but the plane's response was uneven. Autopilot had kept it mostly stable, but turbulence and minor course corrections were pulling at the edges of control. She grabbed the radio and keyed it. "This is 01, I'm taking control, stand by for course adjustment." A collective silence seemed to hang over the frequency. The F-22 pilots blinked, trying to reconcile what they had just heard with what their instruments were showing. The civilian plane wasn't behaving like a rogue aircraft. It was under expert control, under the guidance of someone who had commanded jets far deadlier and far faster than this lumbering airliner. 01, one of them finally spoke, his voice tight, almost reverent. "Confirm you're engaged." "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in the cabin. "I'm in control. I need vectors for emergency landing." For a moment, the F-22 pilots simply watched. Their training screamed at them to intercept, to take evasive action in case of a threat, but they could feel it in their bones. This was no threat. This was someone who belonged in the air, someone who carried authority that transcended rank and protocol. Back in the cockpit, she assessed the instruments, noting the drop in cabin pressure, the uneven throttle from the unconscious pilot's previous maneuvers, and the wind shear at 32,000 feet. She wasn't just flying a plane, she was rewriting the script of life and death, balancing physics and instinct with sheer courage. "Cabin pressure is stabilizing," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Her eyes flicked to the passenger's reflection in the small cockpit mirror. Fear was everywhere, but so was hope. Somehow, they had latched onto her presence as a lifeline. The first challenge came with the weather. A line of thunderstorms stretched across their projected route, lightning arcing like fingers of white-hot steel against the night sky. She adjusted the flight path, banking the plane carefully, avoiding turbulence while maintaining a steady altitude. Every degree mattered. One miscalculation could send them into a spiral from which recovery was impossible. Suddenly, an alert lit up the dashboard, a warning that the landing gear might not deploy fully due to hydraulic strain. Her stomach lurched, but she didn't panic. Years of fighter-pilot training had prepared her for catastrophic failures. She ran through the checklist in her head, fingers moving over controls, making minor adjustments to pressure and hydraulics, coaxing the systems back to life. The F-22s maintained their positions, forming a protective formation above and alongside the plane. Every second was tense. The pilots' eyes flicked between their radar screens and the massive aircraft beneath them. They couldn't help but notice the calm, calculated precision of 01's inputs, her control smooth, even under pressure. Then came the first jolt. Turbulence hit hard, tossing the plane like a rag doll. Passengers screamed, seatbelts strained, and the lights flickered violently. Her hands clenched the yoke. The autopilot struggled, warning lights flashed again, but she didn't hesitate. She countered, her movements fluid and deliberate, her body almost remembering a rhythm it had learned years ago in jets that could outrun missiles. Briggs' voice broke through the tension, clipped but supportive. "You're doing fine, just keep it steady." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Copy," she said, her voice calm, almost serene, adjusting course, preparing for descent. But just as the descent began, another crisis emerged. The captain's heart monitor beeped erratically, a reminder that the unconscious pilot's condition was deteriorating. Oxygen levels were fluctuating. The plane wasn't just fighting gravity and weather, it was fighting time. She realized she would have to stabilize him enough to maintain control until landing. Her hands moved quickly, inserting an IV line, monitoring vitals and making adjustments to keep the pilot's body alive. Sweat poured down her forehead, but she didn't flinch. Every movement was deliberate, a combination of care and precision. And then a new voice cut across the radio, one she didn't expect. The FAA controller, voice trembling with disbelief. 01, the F-22s are holding position. We need to know your intentions. You're taking command." "Yes," she said simply. "Prepare emergency services. We're landing, but we need a clear path. Everyone's alive, but time is critical." The F-22s adjusted, forming a tighter protective ring around the aircraft. Radar screens in military bases lit up as other controllers tried to reconcile the fact that a commercial jet, in serious distress, was being piloted with the authority and skill of one of the nation's most legendary aviators. In the cabin, passengers were still screaming, still crying, still panicking. But amid the chaos, a fragile thread of hope began to form. Someone finally whispered, almost inaudibly, "She knows what she's doing." But just as relief began to seep in, the unthinkable happened. A mechanical alarm blared, a loud, insistent shriek that echoed through the cockpit. The hydraulic system for the landing gear had failed again. This time, the problem was critical. She froze for only a second, enough to register the danger, then dove into action. The plane would land, but the path ahead had become treacherous. Her hands moved over the controls, flipping switches, rerouting pressure, bypassing failed systems. Sweat stung her eyes, but she ignored it. Every calculation, every adjustment was a gamble. One misstep could be the end, not just for her but for everyone aboard. Outside, lightning split the sky, the F-22s casting shadows across the fuselage. Time seemed to stretch, the seconds dragging, each one heavier than the last. And then, over the radio, a voice broke the tension. "01, they're waiting for you on the runway." Her jaw tightened. Relief didn't come yet, not when the landing was still ahead. But in that moment, she felt something stir inside her, a quiet resolve. They were all counting on her. Every life in that cabin, every soul in the air, depended on the one pilot who refused to fail. She inhaled, steadied her hands, and whispered under her breath, "Let's bring them home." And as the plane began its precarious descent, the F-22s flanked her like silent guardians, the night sky crackling with tension, leaving everyone, pilots, controllers, and passengers, on the edge of their seats. Because in the next moments, nothing would be certain, except the sheer audacity of the woman known only as 01. The cabin of Flight 482 was a pressure cooker of panic. The overhead compartments rattled with turbulence, and the fluorescent lights flickered as if afraid of the chaos unfolding below. Passengers clutched armrests, knuckles white, eyes wide with terror. Flight attendants dashed between rows, trying to reassure, but their voices trembled, betraying the fear that gripped them all. At 32,000 feet, hundreds of lives teetered on the edge, and the plane's autopilot was straining against the unpredictable movements of an unconscious pilot slumped over the controls. Commander Briggs' gaze darted across the cabin, assessing every face. "She's the only one who can do this," he muttered under his breath. His voice carried no hesitation, only urgency. He knew what he was asking. Stepping into the cockpit was stepping into a war zone where a single miscalculation meant instant death. But he had seen her in action once, years ago, in missions no one dared talk about outside classified files. That memory carried weight, and now it was their lifeline. Her boots clicked against the cockpit floor as she approached. She swallowed hard, but her training, decades of it, drilled into muscle memory, kicked in. She assessed the scene. The pilot slumped, oxygen mask slightly askew, hands dangling uselessly over the yoke. Instruments blinked in warning, the autopilot groaning under the weight of maintaining flight. Panic threatened to claw at her, but she pushed it down. Every life on board depended on focus, precision, and calm. Three things she would have to summon from a part of herself she hadn't accessed in years. Briggs spoke almost reverently, "Call sign." Without thinking, almost instinctively, she answered, 01. The words resonated in the cockpit, in the cabin, and across the radio frequencies. To her, it was just a relic of her fighter pilot days. To those listening, it was legend, the call sign of a pilot whose skill and fearlessness were spoken of in hushed tones in military hangars and briefing rooms. She didn't dwell on that now. There was no time for ego or pride. There was only survival. The F-22s, hovering tens of thousands of feet above, had been tracking the commercial flight as a potential threat. But as the call sign 01 echoed through the military frequency, the response was instantaneous. Both F-22 pilots froze mid-flight, hands steadying on their sticks. Training screamed at them to act, to intercept, but instinct whispered differently. 01 wasn't a threat. 01 was an anomaly, a figure who defied expectation and demanded respect. Their flight computers registered a commercial jet, but their eyes registered experience, authority, and lethal competence. Inside the cockpit, she assessed the pilot first. Heart rate erratic, pupils dilated, oxygen fluctuating. She adjusted the mask, gently tilted his head, checked the instruments, and pushed a sequence on the autopilot to stabilize altitude. The plane responded reluctantly, groaning as if acknowledging her authority. She reached for the throttles, feeling the raw energy of 200,000 pounds of metal and fuel under her command. Every movement was precise, deliberate, calculated. This was no longer just a flight. It was a life-or-death choreography where she was the conductor. She keyed the radio. 01, I'm taking control. Need vectors for emergency landing. Prepare all emergency services on approach. Silence, then fragmented chatter from controllers trying to process what was happening. The F-22 pilots maintained a protective pattern above and beside the commercial plane, their jets casting shadows across the fuselage. Even the most confident military flyers couldn't take their eyes off her. There was an unspoken acknowledgement. This was someone who commanded the sky in a way that no ordinary pilot could. The turbulence intensified. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the commercial jet like a silver bullet suspended in air. The autopilot struggled to maintain stability. Warnings blared, alarms shrieked. Yet she remained calm. Years of fighter training had drilled reflex, composure, and split-second decision-making into her very bones. She banked the plane gently, dodging pockets of violent air, adjusting thrust and flaps as though performing a delicate surgical procedure. Cabin pressure stabilizing, she reported calmly to the cabin crew, even as passengers clung to seats, praying, crying, or silent in disbelief. Her voice carried authority. It was the voice of someone used to being in command, used to controlling situations where failure wasn't an option. Then came the first major obstacle. The hydraulic system controlling the landing gear was malfunctioning. Her stomach twisted. Landing an airliner without landing gear was a disaster waiting to happen. She didn't panic. Panic had no place here. But her mind raced, calculating risks, reviewing procedures, mentally mapping every variable. The F-22s adjusted their formation, now flanking her with a precision that mirrored the seriousness of the moment. Air traffic control scrambled personnel on the ground, clearing runways, dispatching fire crews, ambulances, and rescue teams. Every possible contingency was being readied, but it was still down to her. Zero error, zero hesitation. Another jolt hit. Severe turbulence, lightning, and wind shear combined to make the plane buck violently. A collective gasp echoed through the cabin. She gripped the yoke, feet steady on the rudder pedals, arms locked, breathing controlled. Autopilot warnings shrieked. The plane wobbled like a giant suspended in a storm. She countered every movement with precision, her body moving almost instinctively. The plane responded, stabilized, and the cabin crew whispered, She's doing it." Briggs' voice came through the intercom, calm but urgent. 01, the F-22s are in position. You have clearance for emergency landing at Andrews. She nodded to herself, then back at the pilot slumped over the controls. He was stable for now, but she could see the subtle signs of decline. She knew she'd have to keep him alive until touchdown. IV line inserted, oxygen stabilized, vitals monitored constantly, every heartbeat mattered. As she began the descent, another alarm shrieked. The hydraulic system had failed again, this time critically. The landing was now far from simple. Failure meant a crash. Success required ingenuity and courage in equal measure. Her mind raced through protocols, emergency procedures, and unconventional maneuvers she had learned in military jets decades ago. Outside, the storm raged. Lightning illuminated the runway in the distance, the F-22s flanking her, casting elongated shadows across the fuselage. Every second stretched, thick with tension. Passengers whispered prayers, clutching loved ones, their lives suspended on the skill of one extraordinary pilot. The FAA controller's voice crackled through. 01, the runway is prepped. Fire crews standing by. You're cleared, do you read? Her voice was calm, almost serene, belying the torrent of thoughts racing inside. Read you loud and clear, commencing final approach. But the storm wasn't done. A sudden gust shifted the plane violently. Alarms blared. The landing gear warned again. She tightened her grip on the yoke, eyes scanning instruments, calculating, adjusting, pushing the limits of physics and human capability. Sweat stung her eyes, but she ignored it. And then, almost imperceptibly, the plane leveled. A silent, tense moment. The F-22s adjusted, their pilots exhaling collectively, realizing that 01 wasn't just skilled, she was extraordinary. Briggs leaned forward, whispering almost to himself, "She's going to do it." A single thought surged through her mind as the runway neared, lightning painting the sky in white flashes. Every life on board depended on her. Every decision, every movement, every breath mattered. And just as the ground rushed up toward them, the landing gear shuddered. She froze for a split second, not with fear, but in calculation. The plane might survive if she executed perfectly, or it might not. Her hands tightened on the yoke. She whispered under her breath, "Let's bring them home." Then, with a roar of engines and the tension of hundreds of hearts in her hands, the aircraft began its final descent. But in the cockpit, a subtle alarm she hadn't noticed yet began to flash, something that could change everything in an instant. The runway lights blurred through the storm, a ribbon of gold and white beneath a sky writhing with lightning. 01's hands were steady, but her mind ran 1,000 calculations at once. The F-22s flanked her like silent sentinels, scanning for any danger the storm could throw at them. Air traffic control crackled with instructions, coordinating fire crews, emergency vehicles, and ground personnel. Yet all eyes, both in the air and on the ground, were on her. Inside the cockpit, the hum of the engines was deafening, a relentless reminder that every second was precious. She glanced at the unconscious pilot. His breathing was shallow, erratic, yet for now, he clung to life. The plane's systems were battered from turbulence, the landing gear only partially operational, hydraulics straining with every fluctuation in pressure. One wrong move could send them skidding off the runway, tumbling into disaster. 01, wind shear approaching at 500 feet, the controller warned, his voice tight with tension. Adjust immediately. She flicked switches, recalibrated flaps, and subtly shifted the plane's angle, banking against the wind. The aircraft groaned in protest, metal whining, hydraulics straining. The passengers had gone silent. Every scream, every murmur had been swallowed by the storm and the hum of fear. Yet she could feel their collective hope resting squarely on her shoulders. Outside, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the F-22s. Even from her vantage point, she could see the military pilots' reactions. They were no strangers to extreme scenarios, dogfights, evasive maneuvers, even air-to-air combat, but this was different. The skill, precision, and calm she displayed under catastrophic conditions froze them. Every instinct they had screamed respect, awe, and cautious deference. They would act to protect, yes, but they understood they were witnessing something beyond ordinary capability. Cabin pressure stable. Altitude 1500–1500, she counted under her breath, guiding the plane closer to the runway. The storm's fury seemed to crescendo as though testing her resolve. Rain lashed against the windshield, streaking like glass shards in the glow of the landing lights. Her gloved hands adjusted the throttle, nudged the yoke, and made micro-corrections with surgical precision. Suddenly, the first major complication hit. One of the landing gear tires failed to extend fully. An alarm shrieked, echoing in the cockpit, warning of critical failure. 01 froze only for a heartbeat, not with fear but to calculate the risks. She assessed the angle, the speed, and the limited friction available. A full-speed emergency landing on a single functioning wheel was a dangerous gamble. The storm offered no reprieve, the rain slicking the tarmac like oil. 01, brace for severe impact, the controller said, voice almost breaking. Fire crews on the runway braced themselves, holding hoses and extinguishers, ready for a disaster that could erupt at any moment. Her instincts kicked in. Years of flying fighter jets, dodging missiles, handling high-G maneuvers, surviving catastrophic failures, had drilled an unshakable confidence into her. She calculated the landing vector, adjusted the nose, and began the descent. The plane shuddered violently, tilting as it fought against wind shear. Thunder rumbled overhead like an angry giant. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed anew, some crying, some praying, some frozen in disbelief. She caught glimpses of faces pressed to the windows, the reflections of lightning mirrored in wide, terrified eyes. Every movement was critical. She had to land the plane, keep the pilot alive, and ensure that hundreds of lives were not instantly lost. The F-22 pilots watching from above adjusted their positions. One radioed, vectoring to assist, be ready for rapid intervention if required. But even they knew, deep down, that intervention might never be needed. The legend of 01 was proving real. Her skill, intuition, and nerve were extraordinary even by military standards. As the aircraft descended further, the rain intensified, pounding against the fuselage like a relentless drumbeat. Lightning forked dangerously close, momentarily blinding them with its brilliance. The single-operable landing gear's pressure warnings escalated. She had to land perfectly, or the aircraft would tip and spin, dragging hundreds of souls into calamity. "Throttle steady, align with runway," she muttered, her eyes locked on the landing lights. Her knuckles whitened against the controls as she fine-tuned each microsecond adjustment. The plane responded, tilting, then stabilizing, gliding just above the runway's slick surface. The first touch was rough but held. The plane's single-functioning tire kissed the tarmac, squealing, metal straining, sparks flying as hydraulic systems groaned in protest. 01 maintained control, countering the tilt, adjusting the flaps, nudging the nose down. For a terrifying moment, the plane wobbled, threatening to tip to one side, but she held it steady, forcing physics to bend to her will. Passengers' screams turned into gasps of disbelief and relief. Flight attendants, eyes wide, whispered prayers of thanks. She knew, though, that the ordeal wasn't over. She had to slow the plane completely, prevent a skid, and avoid flipping onto its side. Every second was now a battle between momentum, friction, and her own reflexes. The runway stretched before them like a narrow lifeline, rain slicked and unforgiving. She felt the aircraft's weight shift dangerously, the nose threatening to jackknife. F-22s circled above, engines roaring, scanning for debris, ready to shield the plane from anything that might strike. Ground crews braced, adrenaline surging as they tracked the miraculous maneuver unfolding. With steady hands and a precise rhythm, she engaged reverse thrust, feathered the flaps, and nudged the nose slightly upward. The aircraft shuddered violently, then slowed, inching forward like a wounded titan crawling across the tarmac. Sparks flared from the undercarriage where metal scraped against wet runway, smoke curling into the stormy night. And then a sudden, heart-stopping alarm. The hydraulics holding the remaining landing gear threatened to fail entirely. A catastrophic collapse would send the plane flipping sideways in an instant. Time seemed to stretch into infinity. She had mere seconds to decide. Abort the landing, risking a crash at higher speed, or push forward, gambling everything on her skill. Her eyes met the unconscious pilot, then scanned the runway, then the storm beyond. A flash of lightning illuminated the F-22s, their shadows long and imposing. She made her choice. "Hold on," she whispered under her breath, voice barely audible over the roar of engines and storm. "We're going home." The plane shuddered violently, tires dragging, sparks flying, rain blinding. Every life on board seemed to hang by a thread. Outside, the storm unleashed one final gust, testing every ounce of her precision. The F-22s adjusted, prepared for last-minute protection. And then, just as the nose gear was about to fail, the aircraft skidded to a grinding halt. Smoke and sparks hissed across the tarmac. Hearts stopped for a fraction of a second before reality sank in. The plane had survived. It was still upright, intact against all odds. A deafening silence followed, broken only by the hiss of brakes and emergency systems. The passengers were shaking, wide-eyed, trembling from adrenaline. Flight attendants collapsed into seats, hands clasped in silent gratitude. Ground crews stared in awe, some unable to believe the miracle that had just unfolded. Above, the F-22 pilots exhaled collectively. They had witnessed a masterclass in aeronautical precision, human courage, and nerve. 01 had not just landed the plane. She had defied what seemed physically possible, commanding an airliner like it was a fighter jet, rewriting the rules in real time. But even as relief flooded the cabin, a subtle warning flashed on the cockpit console. One final system anomaly, one last threat that had not yet been addressed. A reminder that for 01, the night was far from over, and the danger that had brought her back into the sky was not yet finished. Her hands hovered over the yoke. She exhaled slowly, eyes scanning instruments, calculating the next move. The storm rumbled overhead as if aware it had been bested, yet unwilling to concede entirely. And somewhere deep in the radar towers, the F-22 pilots whispered among themselves, still staring in disbelief. That was 01, one said. The legends, they were real. A tense beat passed. Then, a sudden alert from the console lit up red, a signal that would force 01 to make another impossible decision. The entire airfield held its breath. The storm's fury began to ebb, leaving a trembling silence over Andrews Air Force Base. Smoke curled from the straining undercarriage of Flight 482, mingling with the rain-soaked tarmac. Passengers were unbuckling, hands shaking, eyes wide, whispering prayers of disbelief and gratitude. Flight attendants moved swiftly, ushering passengers toward the emergency exits, their own adrenaline still spiking from the near-impossible landing. But 01's eyes never left the cockpit instruments. The plane wasn't safe yet. The hydraulics were compromised, the landing gear still partially damaged, and one misstep during taxiing could send the aircraft skidding across the runway. Every inch required careful attention, and she moved with the same precision she had demanded of herself at 32,000 feet. The legend of 01 was not about daring alone. It was about control when chaos reigned supreme. Briggs, standing on the tarmac near the forward doors, caught her eye. "You did it," he said, voice tight with awe. "Everyone's alive." She gave him a curt nod, her focus never wavering. "Not done yet," she murmured, sliding the throttles to idle and preparing for taxi. Every movement of the aircraft caused sparks and shudders. Passengers craned their necks to watch, sensing that even now, survival was not guaranteed. Above them, the F-22s maintained their protective orbit, engines slicing through the clearing clouds. Radar operators and base personnel watched in disbelief. Fighter jets had been scrambled for countless emergencies, but few had witnessed the kind of nerve, skill, and composure that 01 displayed. Even seasoned military personnel whispered the name reverently over radios. Then came the unexpected complication. A group of untrained ground vehicles had entered the tarmac during the landing chaos, unaware that a critically damaged airliner was moving toward them. Fire trucks, ambulances, and base support vehicles froze as the plane inched forward, sparks flying from its damaged landing gear. 01's eyes flicked to the hazard indicators. She had mere seconds to act. "Hold positions, hold positions," she shouted over the intercom, her voice cutting through the frightened murmurs of passengers and the crackling radios of emergency crews. She twisted the yoke, nudging the plane's nose with precision, coaxing it around the stray vehicles. Sparks flared as the fuselage scraped lightly against the tarmac, but nothing catastrophic occurred. She exhaled sharply, not relief, just acknowledgement. This wasn't over. The passengers now fully understood what they had experienced. Fear had given way to awe. Murmurs filled the cabin, whispers of the pilot who had saved their lives, of the call sign that had frozen F-22s midair, of the woman who had turned near-certain death into survival. Yet no one dared break the tense silence entirely. They were still suspended between terror and relief, knowing that one wrong move on the ground could undo everything. Briggs leaned closer to her, voice low. "Medical team is standing by for the captain, but there's more. Intelligence this flight, it was being tracked, not just FAA, military private contractors. They were monitoring certain cargo." His eyes narrowed. "They're not going to be happy you handled it yourself." Her stomach clenched. She had trained to save lives, to act decisively, but she knew the world she had walked away from hadn't forgotten her. 01 was a name that carried consequences, doors opening and closing based on reputation alone. Now she had thrust herself back into the spotlight, whether she liked it or not. On the tarmac, the plane finally slowed, coming to a cautious stop. Fire crews encircled the aircraft, assessing damage, ready to respond to the slightest misstep. Emergency lights flashed across the fuselage, illuminating the streaks of rain and sparks along the undercarriage. Passengers clutched hands, knees shaking, tears flowing freely. Many silently thanked the unknown hero who had brought them to safety. 01's eyes scanned the instruments one last time before exiting the cockpit. She moved slowly down the aisle, assessing passengers, nodding quietly to flight attendants, giving brief reassurance. "You're safe. We're here." The words felt insufficient, yet they were all she could offer. Then came the first real shock. A radio transmission crackled through, unfamiliar, encrypted, and immediate. 01, report status. "You have violated protocol. Proceed to secure location. Command requires debrief. Do not attempt unauthorized exit." The words hit like ice. Her hands tightened on the railing. The call sign had not just saved the plane, it had painted a target on her back. Intelligence agencies, military command, contractors monitoring classified cargo, they all knew she had intervened. They all knew 01 was in the air, controlling a high-value flight, and now they were summoning her. Passengers, oblivious to the impending storm behind the calm after the landing, began to move toward exits. Ground crews whispered among themselves, exchanging nervous glances. Fire trucks and ambulances, though operational, seemed secondary to the looming tension that had just dropped over the airfield. Briggs approached, lowering his voice. "They'll want her alone. You need to stay calm, trust me. You know what they're capable of." Her mind raced. She had faced enemies before, but this was different. They weren't immediately lethal. They were calculated, patient, and deeply informed. Every action she had taken, every move in the sky, had been observed, analyzed, and now it had drawn attention. Outside, the F-22s maintained an orbit, their pilots watching for further threats. They had acted as guardians during the flight, but their roles now shifted. They could provide cover, intelligence, or rapid response, but they could not interfere directly. This was a human chessboard, and 01 was at its center. Inside the plane, a passenger whispered to another, "Who is she?" She's a miracle." The comment echoed the general sentiment. Unbeknownst to them, their hero was about to face a challenge far greater than piloting a plane through a storm. 01's radio beeped again, urgent and commanding. "You will follow instructions immediately. Secure the pilot and cargo. Stand by for extraction." Her jaw tightened. Extraction. That was no routine procedure. That was a command indicating classified interests, hidden agendas, and stakes far higher than any passenger or plane. Her mind calculated options, every route, every possible resistance, every angle of leverage. She had survived impossible flights before. Could she survive the scrutiny and demands that awaited on the ground? She stepped carefully down the plane stairs, rain soaking her jacket, every eye on her. Fire crews and FAA officials gave way instinctively. Passengers murmured, whispering her name, caught between awe and relief. Briggs fell into step beside her. Don't make a move they're not expecting. You've survived the sky, now survive the ground. Her heart pounded. The airfield felt simultaneously empty and electric. The storm had passed, leaving only slick tarmac, flashing emergency lights, and the weight of unseen eyes monitoring every move. Then a black SUV rolled onto the airfield, headlights cutting through the mist. The vehicle slowed deliberately, waiting. From inside, a figure stepped out, clad in tactical gear, movement deliberate, posture rigid with authority. Every instinct screamed warning. 01's eyes narrowed. She had faced countless threats, but this one was different. The call sign that had frozen F-22s midair now stood at the precipice of something far more dangerous. Briggs whispered, "You're not out of the storm yet, and this is only the beginning." The figure from the SUV took a single step forward. A hand motioned, signaling extraction, control, and authority. But their identity was obscured, their motives unreadable. 01 knew immediately that this encounter would determine far more than the fate of the passengers. It would dictate the next chapter of her life, one she had hoped never to revisit. And in that charged silence, with emergency lights flickering and rain dripping from the tarmac, a new kind of tension gripped everyone on the airfield. One that promised that the legend of 01 was far from over, and that the night still held secrets no one could predict. 01's boots splashed through puddles on the slick tarmac, every step measured, every breath controlled. The black SUV had stopped a mere 20 feet from the plane, headlights cutting long shadows across the emergency vehicles and the wet runway. The figure that emerged radiated authority, moving with deliberate precision, tactical gear, reflecting the flashes of lightning that lingered from the storm. 01 knew the moment she made eye contact that this wasn't a routine protocol officer. It was someone connected to the highest levels of command, someone who had tracked her every move without pause. 01, the figure said, voice calm but carrying the weight of command. We need to secure the aircraft and its pilot immediately. Move now. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from calculation. She had navigated life-or-death scenarios in the air countless times, but the ground was unpredictable. Rules were different. Variables multiplied exponentially. Authority could be wielded as easily as a weapon, and she had to discern whether this figure was an ally or a threat. Briggs placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Listen," he said quietly. "They're legit, but they'll expect compliance. Don't underestimate them and don't reveal anything they're not supposed to know. Keep control where you can." 01's eyes flicked toward the passengers exiting the aircraft. They were uninjured, but their relief made them vulnerable, easy collateral if the situation deteriorated. She made a silent promise. No one else would be harmed if she could prevent it. The tactical figure motioned, and a small team of agents approached, moving with military precision. Their eyes scanned the aircraft and the surrounding emergency crews, assessing, calculating, asserting dominance. Every movement was a message: authority, control, and intent. 01 stepped forward. "You want the aircraft secured. We can coordinate safely, but no one else gets hurt." The figure tilted their head, eyes sharp. "We trust your skills, 01. But this is beyond routine. Protocol dictates we escort both the plane and the pilot to a secure location immediately." Her stomach tightened. The secure location wasn't a hospital. It wasn't a base. It was classified territory, a place where questions were answered with silence and lives measured in compliance. Briggs' voice broke the tension. "I can coordinate logistics. We can make this smooth, but you need to come with them." 01 exhaled slowly. She had no choice. The pilot's condition was unstable, and time was a luxury they didn't have. She gave one last glance at the passengers. Their eyes met hers, gratitude and fear mingled. She nodded silently, a promise that their survival wasn't the end of her involvement. The team moved quickly. The pilot was stabilized on a stretcher, oxygen and vitals monitored, and every agent worked in sync. 01 followed, eyes constantly scanning, mind running through contingencies. Every exit route, every potential threat, every unknown variable. Even the F-22s above maintained surveillance, their pilots now silent sentinels, aware that their role had shifted from protection to observation. The SUV doors slammed. Engine roared. The convoy moved with precise coordination, weaving around emergency vehicles and wet tarmac. Rain slicked the ground, reflections of flashing lights distorted the scene. 01 sat in the rear, knees braced, mind calculating the possibilities. The storm had passed physically, but the tension inside her hadn't. The air was thick with uncertainty, and every passing second carried potential danger. Inside the vehicle, she observed the agents. Their eyes never wavered, their movements measured, deliberate, and professional. They were trained, skilled, lethal if required. She was in their world now, and her knowledge of flight, tactics, and survival would be her only leverage. Then came the first unsettling revelation. One of the agents spoke quietly into a headset. "Control confirms. The F-22 pilots are still observing. They're reporting unusual readings on the aircraft, something about energy fluctuations in the systems during descent." 01's eyes narrowed. Energy fluctuations. That meant someone somewhere had been monitoring the aircraft's electronics in a way she hadn't anticipated. Perhaps classified tracking, experimental equipment, or surveillance she hadn't known was active. The thought chilled her. The storm she had navigated in the sky was not the only danger. The plane itself, the cargo, and her involvement were now under scrutiny by unseen forces with unknown motives. The SUV stopped abruptly at a concealed entrance. Security personnel moved in tight formation, scanning every angle. The rain had turned to mist, the tarmac slick and glistening. 01 stepped out, her boots hitting the ground with intent. Every muscle tense, every sense alert. She followed the pilot on the stretcher, nodding the secure facility ahead. Reinforced steel doors, surveillance cameras, armed guards positioned with precision. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingling with tension. The pilot was transferred to a secured medical bay, monitors immediately attached, agents observing every detail. 01 stepped back, assessing the situation. This wasn't a hospital. This was a controlled environment designed to monitor, evaluate, and extract information, an interrogation chamber masquerading as care. One of the lead agents finally addressed her. 01, you acted outside of protocol, but your actions saved hundreds of lives. That is recognized. However, your involvement has triggered a cascade of events that require explanation. We need information on your experience, your decisions, and the aircraft itself. Her heart tightened. The question wasn't about the plane, it was about her. Her past, her training, her call sign, and the legend of her exploits were now currency in a world she had tried to leave behind. "Information," she repeated, voice calm, steady. "What exactly do you want to know?" The lead agent's eyes locked onto hers. "Everything. From the moment you assumed control to the landing. Systems, maneuvers, calculations, anything outside standard protocol. This is classified and you have breached multiple levels of security." 01's mind raced. She knew giving information freely could have consequences far beyond the immediate situation. Every move, every word, every disclosure would be scrutinized. And yet, defiance could be equally dangerous. She needed leverage, and quickly. Before she could respond, alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the facility. Monitors lit up with rapid alerts. One of the agents barked, "Unknown aircraft entering restricted airspace." Multiple F-16s scrambled, possible hostile. 01's instincts kicked in immediately. Even on the ground, even surrounded, she was still 01. Her mind calculated the scenario. Hostiles, potentially armed, aiming for the facility. Every step, every movement of the intruder could spell disaster for the pilot, the passengers, and the agents. "Where are the secondary defenses?" she demanded. "Where are the F-22s?" The lead agent hesitated, then answered. "F-22s are in visual range, but engagement is limited without confirmation of threat. This is unprecedented." Her eyes narrowed. Unprecedented or expected? Before they could answer, an explosion rocked the far end of the compound. Smoke and debris filled the corridor. Agents rushed to defensive positions. The pilot's monitors alarmed, warning of sudden system fluctuations. The storm was no longer in the sky, it was inside, threatening to spiral beyond control. 01's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. "Secure the pilot, contain the threat. I'm taking point." The lead agent looked at her hesitant. "You." "Do it," she snapped. "No hesitation, every second counts." The agents paused, then obeyed. 01 moved toward the disturbance, every step precise, measured, her presence commanding attention. She had faced storms in the sky that could tear planes apart. Now on the ground, she faced an enemy that could dismantle lives in moments. And in the flickering fluorescent lights, the shadow of the unknown adversary moved closer. One step, one decision, one miscalculation, and the consequences would be catastrophic. 01 inhaled sharply. The storm had not ended. It had only changed shape. The alarms continued to wail, their shrill cries echoing off the concrete walls of the secure facility. Smoke curled through the corridors, the acrid scent of burning electronics stinging 01's nostrils. Every nerve in her body screamed for action, but her mind was razor-sharp. She had flown through storms that could tear steel apart, navigated airliners on the brink of destruction, and outmaneuvered threats that most pilots wouldn't live to see. But this was different. The danger was human, calculating, adaptive. The storm wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. She sprinted down the corridor, boots slapping against the slick floor, every step measured yet urgent. Behind her, agents followed, their weapons drawn but their movements careful, almost hesitant, as if they knew she would make the critical calls. The unconscious pilot lay in a nearby bay, hooked to monitors and life support. His breathing was stable for now, but any disruption in the chaos outside could undo hours of her careful management. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the smoke, a man in tactical gear, but unlike the agents escorting her. His eyes were sharp, cold, and filled with a certainty that unnerved her. He moved with precision, his every step intentional, his weapon aimed but not yet fired. The room seemed to shrink around him, the walls closing in, every shadow amplified by the flickering lights. 01, the man said, voice calm but authoritative, carrying the weight of command and unspoken menace. "Step aside. This doesn't concern civilians. This is a matter of national security." Her pulse did not quicken, fear was irrelevant. She had faced death in the air, seen comrades fall, and navigated impossible scenarios. But she had also learned one rule: control the situation or it controls you. "Step aside," she repeated, voice steady. "Hundreds of lives depend on me controlling this plane and protecting this pilot. You're standing in my way." A faint smirk crossed the man's face. "You think your legend grants immunity. You've acted outside protocol, outside every guideline, and you've drawn attention to sensitive cargo. This is bigger than saving lives. It's about containment. You understand containment, don't you?" Her eyes narrowed. Containment. That word carried implications. Experiments, intelligence, classified operations she had never been briefed on, yet whose effects were now unfolding in front of her. The storm in the air, the energy anomalies, the F-22s freezing midair, all pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized she was part of. "Explain," she demanded, "now." He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured sharply and the agents began moving toward the pilot's bay, weapons ready. 01's instincts screamed. Any aggression here could cost lives. She stepped forward, placing herself between the agents and the pilot. "Back off. Everyone's alive because of me. I don't care what protocol says, step back or you'll regret it. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as if the universe itself recognized the tension in the room. Then, a sudden surge of movement. The intruder lunged, tactical blade in hand. 01 reacted instantly. She sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting with precision honed from years of combat training. The blade clattered across the floor. The room erupted into chaos. Agents shouted, scrambling for control. 01 moved like a force of nature, calm, decisive, and unrelenting. She disarmed another assailant, vaulted over equipment, and used momentum to pin a third against the wall. Her every action was fluid, precise, lethal if necessary, but controlled enough to avoid unnecessary casualties. The intruder pulled a concealed device from his belt, a small, blinking box. His intention was clear: detonate, disable, or extract. 01 lunged, slamming her body into his, sending the device skidding across the floor. Sparks flew. Red warning lights blinked. Time slowed, each heartbeat a drum in her ears. The F-22 pilots above, monitoring from their orbit, observed unusual electromagnetic readings from the facility, equipment anomalies caused by the intruder's device. They had trained for aerial combat, but the situation unfolding on the ground was beyond their immediate intervention. 01's call sign was no longer just a legend. It was the focal point of a national emergency. She kicked the device away and landed in a crouch, eyes on the intruder, calculating. One wrong move could trigger a catastrophe, every fiber of her being tensed for action. Then she lunged again, twisting the man's arm behind him, forcing him to the ground. His eyes were wide with disbelief. "You, how?" 01, she said sharply, not a single step further. The agents froze, uncertain. 01 pressed the advantage. She had neutralized the immediate threat, but the storm, both literal and figurative, was far from over. There was a reason the call sign had made F-22 pilots freeze in midair. She had faced impossible odds before, but this combined threat, aircraft, human agents, and classified operations, was unprecedented. The intruder's device lay at her feet, blinking ominously. She crouched, analyzing. One wrong connection, one accidental jostle, and the entire facility could suffer catastrophic failure. Sweat streaked her face, rain from outside still clinging to her jacket, but her hands moved with confidence, scanning the device, disarming, rerouting, bypassing. Her training had been literal life-or-death preparation, and now every lesson, every instinct converged in this single, critical moment. Finally, the device clicked off. The warning lights faded. The intruder lay subdued, breathing hard, eyes darting. 01 stood, scanning the room. The agents, once uncertain, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. She had not just saved the aircraft, not just protected the pilot, but neutralized an immediate threat without a single casualty. A voice crackled over the facility intercom. 01, situation under control, threat neutralized, extraction units inbound, maintain position. She exhaled slowly, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. The pilot's vitals stabilized further, monitored by the agents she now cautiously trusted. The passengers, still outside, had been moved to secure shelters, unaware of the peril that had unfolded just yards away from them. One of the F-22 pilots broke radio silence. 01, we've never seen anything like that. The call sign, it's more than a name. It's a guarantee. You're extraordinary. Her lips curved in a faint, tired smile. Extraordinary or not, she replied quietly, I just did what had to be done. Nobody else was going to. Briggs approached, voice low. You've changed everything tonight. Lives saved, threats neutralized. But 01, there are consequences. People above us will be watching, judging. Your actions are now classified and you're unavoidable. 01's eyes hardened. She knew this was the truth. She had stepped back into a world she thought she had left behind, and the storm had found her, demanding recognition. The legend of 01 had returned not by choice, but by necessity. The intruder was secured, the device removed, and the pilot stabilized. The storm outside had passed completely, leaving a wet, glistening tarmac under an unnerving calm. The F-22s circled one last time before breaking formation, engines roaring in acknowledgement of the hero who had outmaneuvered impossible odds. As Zero One watched them disappear into the night sky, she realized something profound. The world had shifted. Lives had been saved, threats neutralized, legends reaffirmed. But the cost was not yet clear. Every eye that had witnessed her skill now knew the name, the call sign, the force she represented. Zero One would never be invisible again. And then, as she turned toward the pilot and the awaiting extraction team, a subtle alert flickered on a nearby monitor, a new, unexpected anomaly. She froze, instincts flaring. Whatever storm had passed outside was nothing compared to what was waiting. Her hand tightened on the yoke of fate, her mind calculating, ready. The legend of Zero One was far from finished. The room held its breath. The night held its secrets, and somewhere beyond the horizon, new challenges waited. Zero One exhaled slowly, eyes cold, heart steady. The story was over for now, but the legend, that would endure.